So I was asked, as the host of the Pilton Palais and the kind of Q&A guy, to maybe say a few words about Orlando, the movie you're about to watch. Perhaps you're going to rewatch it. And it's a thrill to know that Tilda's here. But how do I encapsulate this movie? I mean, it asks such humongous questions about what is it to be a man, what is it to be a woman, about the gender divide, if there even is one, about immortality. Such beautiful images from Sally Potter, who wrote and directed it, and also wrote some of the music as well, just to really show off. But she said this movie was inconceivable without one person. And you might be thinking it could be the incredible production designer or costume designer, but of course it is our Orlando, Tilda Swinton, who she describes as the human being that made the film conceivable, the only possible choice. Please put your hands together rapidly and loudly for Tilda Swinton. Louder, come on. Begin with the beginning. 30 years. How does it feel to be here in Glastonbury in the Pilton Palais celebrating 3 decades of Orlando?
Well, I mean, not to be a poser, but the film is all about time not meaning anything. And it is really crazy to say that anything is 30 years old that I had anything to do with. I mean, I still feel like I'm 13, so it's odd to say we made something 30 years ago. But it's really true. It feels like, and I don't know whether you'll feel this when you see it, if you haven't seen it before, but it feels so fresh and like it was made yesterday. And Sally Potter and I have had this extraordinary business of, first of all, it took us quite a long time to get it made, and we've been reintroducing it for the last 30 years, like it never ends. So, yeah, it's eternal, seemingly.
Very well put. You shot this movie not just here in the UK, but in St. Petersburg, I believe, and also in Khiva in Uzbekistan. Could you talk a bit about shooting across the globe, but particularly in Khiva, which is just jaw-dropping in the movie?
So again, a bit of time travel. There'll be many of you here who can't even imagine, but 30 years ago, saying that you wanted to make a period film, a costume film, was kind of insane. I mean, everybody said it was impossible and not desirable. Everybody said it's very boring and stuffy, and there's no way that we're going to give you any money to do it. So we were pretty impoverished, and both Sally Potter and I had no profile to speak of. We couldn't raise a dime, so we started pretending that someone had given us the money to make the film. So we just acted as if, and we started planning how we were going to shoot it, and then we started thinking where we were going to shoot it. And there's a very important scene in the film, which of course I should say is based on the Genius book by Virginia Woolf, for those who didn't know that. There's a very important scene on a frozen river, the frozen Thames, and we had 2 ways of going about that, either to do it in a studio or to go and find a bit of frozen river or sea. So we decided to go and find the frozen sea outside coming into St. Petersburg. So we went to Russia and we were scouting around as if someone was going to fund this thing. And when we were talking to our Russian collaborators who were going to help us with the locations, they said, "What's the film about?" And people have been asking us, you know, everywhere we went to Cannes to try and raise money for it. We were trying to raise it in America and all sorts of ridiculous ruses, none of which worked. People said, "What's the film about?" And we would say, "Well, it's about immortality and androgyny and being an artist and, you know, internationalism." And they would say, "Yeah, but what's the film about?" And we would say, "Well, it's about immortality and androgyny and, you know, the ridiculousness of class." And they'd say, "Yes, but what's the film about?" And it just became absurd. But when we went to Russia, they said, "What's it about?" And we said, "It's about immortality and androgyny." And they said, "That's fine, we'd like to help you fund it." And this is the first international co-production with a Russian company. It was so strange. I feel like Rip Van Winkle. It's such a long time ago. The Soviet Union, children, had just dissolved. And at that moment, all the big corporations, well, they weren't corporations, the big Len Film and Mosfilm, the big state-funded studios, were kind of, fragmenting, and they became private enterprises. And this is the first international co-production with Mosfilm, with Lenfilm rather, which was one of those. So off we went to St. Petersburg. That is the real frozen sea. And then we went to Uzbekistan to shoot Constantinople. And yeah, it was a trip. It was a super, super trip. It cost so little, we don't even know how much it cost, because so much of the budget was in rubles, which is a very, very clever idea, actually, when you're putting together this kind of budget. But way more than we could have imagined, but way less than any other films made now to this sort of scale. I would say it probably cost about $10 million, yeah, over 10 weeks.
Again, speaking of time flying, I studied this movie at university, which is a trip. I can only imagine what that is like to hear. But I remember watching Fleabag for the first time and going, hang on a minute. I've seen Orlando. Was part of the fun of shooting this movie speaking to the audience? Because to me, rewatching this film here in the Pilton Palais, the thrill is to have you look at us directly. Could you talk a bit about breaking the fourth wall?
Yeah, that's interesting to remember that at that time that hadn't really been done at all. It was a thing that I did when I first started making pictures with Derek Jarman. I felt a little strange about being filmed, and I remember the first film I made, which was Caravaggio. I asked him at one point, there was some big shot of me from the side, and I said, I feel a bit weird being looked at, can I look back? And being him, he said, yeah. So every film I made with him, I always ended up looking into the camera. And then when I was working with Sally on developing this script, we kept thinking, how can we make it modern? Because the book is about the present moment. It's about history meaning nothing, gender meaning nothing. We'll get onto that in a second. Pretty much, nationhood meaning nothing. It's about the present moment, and it's about the real modern life. And we felt, we're going into the realm. This is about a rich person who's, back in time. That's a big, no-no in terms of relatability. That's going to be an issue. And we didn't want to be in the whole merchant ivory territory. How do we get the audience and keep them with Orlando? And so I said, well, what about this thing of talking to the audience? And we tried it, and we felt it worked. And it's, it was hugely radical at the time, and I think it was very off-putting for a lot of people. But yes, I was aware that it had some fans along the way.
I know period dramas, it's all too easy to go, let's talk about the costumes, but Sandy Powell, outrageously talented, some incredible things that you wore that Quentin Crisp wore. Can you tell us a bit about that process? Because this was a very indie film. You all worked together, hand in glove.
Well, again, sorry to be vulgar and talk about money, but it is important when having any kind of dream of this scale. Sandy Powell and I were kind of children in the school of Jarmania, as I call it. Both of us had made our first film with Derek, the aforementioned Caravaggio, and she'd just come out of fashion school, and I had just not long since left university. We were kids, and we really cut our teeth in that world. And that world was lots of things, and one of the things it was necessity is the mother of invention. And if you have to make a huge, fancy outfit, and you have got, when I say, people talk about no budget, I'm talking about maybe £40, that kind of no budget. And that money most of it is going to go on whoever's going to make it, quite rightly. What Sandy did, what she learned to do with Derek, and what she brought to bear on this film, was to go down to Brick Lane and buy very cheap saris. And she is the mistress of necessity is the mother of invention. And of course, she's gone on to great glories, and she works with Scorsese. In fact, I saw her last week. She's an amazing film artist, but her ability to, turn straw into gold is truly a bedrock of this film, and many others, but really of this film. We couldn't have done it without her.
I'm going to look forward to rewatching this film in a few minutes and going, is that a sorry? Was that once a sorry? Okay, guys, it's your turn. Who is brave enough to pop their hand up?
Hi. When you were making the film, did you have any thought as to the legacy this was going to have as a piece of queer art and, you know, something that would inspire people, something people would be watching in queer studies and would be giving them questions about themselves? Was there a thought to that as you were filming it?
Do you know, I can honestly say yes, there was. When we started to make this film, and we were so inspired by Virginia Woolf's book, as so many are, pretty much anybody who picks it up, because that also was, you know, being studied. I studied that book in university, so we knew that the theme was rich. When we talked about the subject, the whole idea of a flexible sexuality was, it's completely the wrong thing to say that it was hot. It was cold, right? It was completely cold. It was very difficult to imagine. I mean, of course, it was possible to make experimental work that cost less than £40 on this topic. But to try and make a film that we wanted to have a kind of outreach and we wanted to infiltrate the culture. I mean, honestly, I couldn't imagine sitting in Glastonbury 30 years later. Really, I couldn't. But but we did, that was our aim. And you know, honestly, even now, whenever I go into an all-gender bathroom, I go, you know, there was a time, and we have to keep going forward, of course, because some people want to go back. But I wanted to say one thing about the gender aspect, though, because I think, you know, one of the legends of the book and the film is that it's about the trans experience, or that it's about, you know, male to female transition. I would go further and point out that, for me anyway, it is much more inclusive than that. It is about boundarylessness. I think the book is about boundarylessness as well. It's not actually about gender at all. It's about freedom in every sense. And so my fantasy is that if Virginia Woolf had written another 1,000 pages of the book, maybe in the next 50 pages, Orlando might have turned into a spaniel, or, you know, a bottle of whiskey. That there's that feeling of endless reinvention, transformation, evolution, and a sense of empowerment. That's, I think, what she was really interested in, and actually makes it an even more political book, and I hope film, because it's also about, you know, the freedom to ignore or to, you know, not be bound by class, or not to be bound by nation, or not to be bound by history. So, and the whole idea of being, and not to be bound by mortality. So I would just say that I think it's even more packed as a bomb for boundarylessness than it is about gender. But you're absolutely right. We did have our dreams, but even I didn't imagine that we'd be here.
What a wonderful answer to a fantastic question. I think we have time for maybe one more. I'm getting the one more finger. We had someone quite close to our previous questionnaire. Yeah, there we go.
Thanks. I'm going to stand so you can see me. Hi, Tilda. My name is Pepper. My pronouns are she, her, and they. So Orlando meant a lot to me growing up. So thank you so much for that. I'll give you a choose-your-own-adventure question. Is there another book that you'd be passionate about making a film about right now? Or alternatively, is there another social issue you think would be particularly important to bring to the screen at the moment?
Well, that deserves a really long answer, which will go on for several months, or a really short one. So I'll go for the short one. Yes, I'm actually, and this is not a secret, but I'm very happily involved in bringing, it's been a long journey, longer even than bringing Orlando to the screen, to make a film of the great Auntie Mame by Patrick Dennis. which is also in many ways about much that Orlando is about. It's about bringing up a child to have this boundaryless aspect. And by a great aunt, not a great aunt, but a great aunt, who has a really, really free spirit and is able to kind of open his heart to a full life. So and if you're interested and you haven't read it, go and read that book because it's super great.
That, sadly, is just about all the time we have. May I just say, thank you, Tilda, and if Sally Potter were here, we'd thank her too, for such an incredible piece of work and for everything it means to so many people across the world. Thank you again, guys, for attending. Let's enjoy the film together.